Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada Sportsbook.
Welcome to Game Over Montreal. As usual, I am Andrew Berkshire, and your Montreal Canadiens just put on one hell of an effort against a team that should be contending for a cup, or at least is trying to contend for a cup, in the Pittsburgh Penguins. It was probably the best game that they've played all season so far. I guess it's only 4 games, but still, all season. Could count the preseason in that too. And engineered a comeback win. There's a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about, Caufield and Suzuki and the pairing that continues to give results no matter how little help they get overall. We're going to talk about Mike Hoffman because it's just too funny not to talk about Mike Hoffman. And we're going to talk about the 3 defensemen who continue to stand out every single game on this team. But first of all, you want to bet? You can do it at Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook. Football continues, the World Series is around the corner, and they have dropped the puck on the hockey season. Bet pre-game, live in-play, or one of our many prop bets. I suggested a bet earlier in this game of Nick Ritchie outscoring Austin Matthews in October, a prop bet, and it seemed like Dave Bastel at Sports Interaction kind of loved that, so we'll see if we can get some odds on that one coming up soon. Made for Canadians by Canadians, Sports Interaction makes it easy to deposit, play, and cash out. Join now and see all sports betting has to offer. Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. That's sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. Ontario only, 19 plus. Please play responsibly, and if anyone you know or is in your family or loved ones have a gambling addiction, there are resources available in the description of this video to help them out. Please make them available to them. All right, I got to introduce our guests tonight, Jared Book from Habs Eyes on the Prize and Nicolas Cloutier from TVA Sports. How are you guys doing today?
Pretty good. Well, we have to be doing well, right?
You got to enjoy the rare wins because they're going to be relatively rare.
At least it's fun, right? Like, even if they would have lost in overtime, it's
That's
fun.
a good point. And pretty early last year, we knew this was heading towards a rebuild, but last year was no fun. Well, this is still a rebuild. There's no expectation at all, to make the playoffs, but the process is different. The results are different, and the hope is different as well. And we know, guys, we talk a lot about the offense. We're going to talk about Dak Hotie goal, the Drouin pass, and how Suzuki and Cole Caufield are doing well. But in this kind of season, I like to look at trends because the result don't matter as much. And the trend that is the strongest trend I see with the Canadiens right now is the defense and how it's been holding up. Because what did we say about the defense at the beginning of the season? Oh, it was a young defense. It's going to leak chances. And it's not what's happening at all. The Habs have played fairly good offensive teams so far, and the defense has been holding up so well with young defensemen.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the defense a lot, but I want to save it for last. The first thing I want to talk about is Mike Hoffman, because I kind of want to get the negative out of the way so we can focus on the fun.
Sure.
Because I'm not sure how Mike Hoffman, I know they want to sell him at some point, right? So you have to maintain some sort of value, but I'm not sure how they can justify keeping this guy in the lineup. And full disclosure, I thought he had some really decent plays in the first period, but as the game went on, it's just, I've never seen anybody like this guy. He is a gaff machine. And the play that stood out to me most, there was a terrible play on the power play in the third where he just whiffed on it and cleared the zone, which he does almost every power play. But it was Slafkovsky who was having a pretty strong game, driving the middle, and then Hoffman reached out and poke checked him and took the puck away from Slav. It is what
defensive superstar?
Where'd they get this guy?
Mike Hoffman.
Yeah, and face-off specialist too, apparently.
Yeah.
They showed it on the broadcast, a face-off probabilities, and they had him higher than Sidney Crosby at the dot. Honestly, I burst out laughing when I saw that. And Andrew, it's funny that you say, well, they're trying to sell him, and how do you keep him in the lineup? Well, I'm gonna say, how do you manage to sell him as well?
Yeah. And that looks like the territory they're gonna have to end up going, right? Because it's one thing to try to get value for a player or even clear cap space. But in this flat cap world, I don't know who's paying for a $4.5 million Mike Hoffman?
Well, they gave a first round pick just to get rid of Monahan's contract, if that tells you something.
Yeah.
They should use that pick
So
to trade Hoffman.
why would any team take Mike Hoffman's contract at this point?
They should take the pick from Monahan and trade it for Hoffman.
No,
Trade it with Hoffman.
You gotta keep as many first round picks as you can. I feel like it'd be easier to just buy him out, right?
Have you seen the conditions on that first round pick?
Who cares?
Have you seen the conditions?
I mean, the fact that they got a first to take on Monahan, he's been great.
And the conditions are actually smart.
Yeah.
Like if you want to take a look at him and get a real headache.
Yeah, it's actually, I think like Kent Hughes like out lawyered Trey Living on that one.
Yeah.
And he just and Trey Living is like, I'm not gonna read all that.
Probably what happened, to be honest.
Yeah, it's quite the crazy deal. And somebody mentioned Petry in the chat here from Thomas. I feel bad for Jeff Petry because I think outside of the penalties, he had a pretty strong game, but the only Penguin to take penalties, and he takes 3 of them, including in overtime. Jeff, how?
He was always good against the Penguins in overtime, so
it's true.
I guess he hurt them on last time, yeah.
Well, I was joking around that he was going to set up Caufield on a turnover because he's so used to setting up Caufield in overtime, but I guess it set up Doc instead.
Yeah, I didn't mind Petry's game, but to be honest, like it's not like I miss Jeff Petry personally. Like when I see like our defense is holding up.
Yeah, I mean it's also a rebuilding team.
Yeah, sure. I wasn't like, oh yeah, like this guy is missing on the team right now.
Yeah, I feel like they're definitely missing a number 1, but I they need to be rebuilding anyway. So maybe that's the reasoning for keeping Mike Hoffman, right? Is you need somebody to be the tank commander this season, and he's pretty effective at it.
Very effective at it. maybe he's like the new Taylor Hall, where whatever team has Taylor Hall just wins the lottery. Maybe the Canadiens are hoping that Mike Hoffman becomes some kind of good luck charm.
Well, it's a dangerous game though, because I gotta say he's kind of ruining like Slafkovsky's development if they're on the same line. And I kind of feel for the guy because he had a fairly good first period, but they don't put him with the good players. They don't put him with creative players, and with as few ice time as he's getting, he still manages to get like a couple of good looks. So it'd be interesting to see him like get some looks on the power play, just get some more opportunities in general. Because if you're not going to do that, might as well send him to Laval,
Yeah,
I think we'll send him to Laval though.
Yeah, I think he's going to Laval after the 9th game. And there was some confusion 2 episodes ago between the people that we had on. It was Marc Dumont and Hetty talking about Slafkovsky and going to the American Hockey League and the slide rule, essentially, which for some reason people in the... I think it was Marc was confused and some people in the chat were confused about what that means. Basically, it's only available to European players who aren't property of like a CHL team. So if they send Slafkovsky to the American Hockey League, his 3-year entry-level contract, if they send him before the 10th game, does not activate. And that contract slides to the next year, so they get him 3 years for cheap plus this year in the AHL.
It's the same rule when you send down juniors, right? It's why Shane Wright's probably going to go down before the 10th game too. It's just that because he's from Europe, they can send him to the AHL as opposed to Europe or things like that, right? So it's a benefit for sure because, if you compare the experience that Shane Wright's going to have in Kingston as opposed to what Slafkovsky is going to have in Laval, and you have the same benefit at the end of it. I don't want to compare the 2 players. I'm not beating down that bush. I'm just saying that it's a benefit to have him in Laval and even have the option to call him up as well, because as long as because there's 2 things you have to keep in mind with Slafkovsky is that there's the 10 games for the entry-level contract to slide, but there's also 40 games on the roster, and if he doesn't get that, he gets an extra year before unrestricted free agency. Right. Like what is happening with Kirby Dach is why he has an extra year before unrestricted free agency. So there's kind of 2 markers to look at with Slafkovsky. So I don't think the Canadiens care too much about the entry level deal. but I think they will care about that extra year before unrestricted free agency, especially when it comes to, I don't think they're going to bridge him either, right? So buying less years there is a benefit too. But yeah, I mean, I understand wanting to see Slafkovsky in offensive positions, but I think that they're literally just trying to teach him what he needs to work on right now. So it doesn't bother me. Like it's not like Victor Mete situation or Alex or even Jesperi Kotkaniemi. They're not trying to win anyway. So we know that they're going to send him to Laval. They're not going to keep him playing 9 minutes a game for 82 games, which was a problem with Kotkaniemi especially, is that they just refuse to send him down at the first sign of struggle. So I think the expectations are a little bit different there, and obviously this administration, this management team is a lot more focused on player development.
That's very fair, Jared. And I didn't mind him actually, like him being put on the fourth line, because if you play a lot of 5v5 and you actually roll the lines, well, he can get like a pretty decent amount of ice time. But when the special teams get going, that's where it gets tough for him, like to get some ice time. But the thing I'm worried about is when he plays about like 10 minutes per game. To see some kind of growth curve for a player, I'd like to see like at least like 12 to 15. I'm not asking for like an exaggerated amount of ice time, but just some reasonable minutes there. But 10 minutes for a developing player seems a bit low for me personally.
Yeah, I agree. I would have liked to see him get a little bit more ice in this game specifically, because I thought was really bringing it and seemed to be making some good plays, especially in the offensive zone. He had some good defensive plays as well. Yeah. He made a play in the first period where he took the puck along the boards and he purposely skated into traffic along the boards, like pulling in a Penguin forechecker. But before the Penguin forechecker realized, he'd put the puck back between his legs to, I think, Kovacevic, who then immediately like cleared the zone very easily. And it's like smart little plays like that, who he reminds me of right now. It's not a great comparison in terms of like offensive impact right this second, because when he first got his first cup of coffee, Max Pacioretty put up a lot of shots but couldn't score. But you remember those first two times that he was called up, he scored like 3 goals and then 3 goals in like a huge batch of games. He couldn't really like connect the offense.
And didn't you say I might as well go to Hamilton right now?
Yeah, and he was frustrated, right?
Like that.
But you could tell.
What if Slafkovsky said that?
Oh man, I feel like it wouldn't play very well this early. Yeah. But like Pacioretty, I feel like you could tell, just like Slav, like there are some things that aren't quite connecting, but there's a player there, and he reminds me a lot of Pacioretty in that way.
Yeah, I think you have my impression of Slafkovsky since basically even rookie camp is just a guy who's getting used to his body still, right? Yeah. Like he's so big, and he's my first not fear, but my first worry was when I saw his weight at training camp was like, oh, like is he going to be able to move on the ice? And as soon as I saw him skate, I'm like, oh, he's good. It's okay. And I think that he's just getting used to it, right? Like he's a guy, he didn't go through like a huge growth spurt necessarily, but I think he's just a guy who's trying to figure out how to use his body. And, you mentioned Pacioretty. There's another guy in the Canadiens, and I think we're going to talk about a little bit later, who also took some time to get used to his body, and that's Kirby Dach, right?
Yep.
And I think that he's really starting to get to understand, not have the puck like so far out in front of him all the time, and use his reach all the time. And I think that there's something to be said for guys who are, kind of not used to really skating, and plus the speed level too, right? Like those are things you can probably get by in the Olympics and things like that, because you have that extra second to maybe pull it towards you or things like that. In the NHL, you don't have that opportunity, and I think every minute he plays is good for him. And like I said, if they were set on keeping him around for 82 games, playing 10 minutes a game, it's a disaster. But I think it's pretty clear that they're expecting him to go to Laval and play big minutes. And it'll be really, I'm already looking forward to seeing Matthias Norlinder and Juraj Slafkovsky play together, because Matthias Norlinder's looked great in the first 2 games in Laval. So it'll be a lot of fun.
Which is good news, because
I don't mind the added muscles. Yeah. I don't mind the added muscles for Slafkovsky, because muscles are never gonna hurt your skating stride. But the thing is, to me, it hurt his stability on the ice, and he often lost his footing on the ice. For a big guy, that surprised me a lot because we saw a lot of that in Kotkaniemi, but well, he wasn't really matured physically. But it's a different story for Slafkovsky. But I feel like he added so much weight like so quickly that like his upper body and lower body seemed kind of unbalanced for a little bit, and yeah, oftentimes you would see him down on the ice. But he's gonna, during the season, like players lose weight pretty quickly. So I guess he just has to get started. He just has to gain some head of steam, and he'll be fine from there. But yeah, the weight thing worried me a bit at the start of the training camp. But I'm not worried about Slafkovsky because the best is to be seen from now. Like he's just getting started, and one aspect that Andrew kind of touched on is an underrated aspect of his game, and it's his vision on the ice. He's low key deceptive on the ice, and I feel like we talked a lot about his shot, his physicality, but that's one aspect of his game that is not talked about enough.
Yeah, he's going to be a very good playmaker.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Which I think everyone expected because of the Olympics him to be like a big shooter, but I think the playmaking might be the bigger standout as he becomes an NHL player. All right, we're going to move on to especially the top line, but we're going to talk about some positives from the forwards in this game. But before we do that, I got to tell everybody, if you're liking the stream right now, if you're liking the show, hit like on the YouTube video because that helps us grow, and share it on social media. Tell your friends about it because, we're a small growing show on a small growing network, and we need every bit of help from our SDPN family. So shout us out. This is Andrew Berkshire, of course, on Game Over Montreal with Jared Book and Nicolas Cloutier. And so one thing that stuck out going into this game, and obviously Doc is not on that line, but that line was on when they scored. Sean Monahan is the only player who has scored this season without Caufield and Suzuki on the ice for the Montreal Canadiens. Yep. Now, as much as that could be spun as a negative because obviously nobody else is scoring, I got to say, with all the pressure in the world on them, and opposing teams are going to put every like high-end matchup against Caufield and Suzuki, those two are still getting it done. And I can't help but look at that and be incredibly impressed at the beginning of this season.
Well, let's put it this way. On the other side of the ice, there was Malkin, there was Crosby, there was Letang. And if you ask me who the best player was on the ice tonight, it was Cole Caufield. Now, I'm not even talking about the goal. It was a tap in. It was an unbelievable pass from Drouin. But just like from the first period, you could see Caufield had a jump in his game. He was dynamic. He was on every puck. And not even only offensively, even without the puck, he had some good puck battles there.
Yeah, I think, look, like, there was, going into the season, there was always the expectation this team wasn't going to be very good, right? And a lot of people were like, oh, is this going to be too good to not be in the bottom five, say, of the league and not have a chance at a high pick? To me, it doesn't make a difference. And I go back to the bubble playoffs in 2020, right? Who led that team in the bubble playoffs, right? Who really emerged in that? It was Nick Suzuki, Jesperi Kotkaniemi. And if those guys were the guys to ruin that draft pick and make them pick, 16th, which ironically they picked Caden Gooley, which, worked out pretty well, instead of getting a top 10 pick. If that's the guys that are going to drive you, it's a good result. And if this team wins a few more games because Nick Suzuki and Cole Caufield are really good, that's a good thing because this team is going nowhere if they're not top line players in this NHL. This rebuild is over before it starts. If Cole Caufield, Nick Suzuki are not top line players in the NHL.
With that said,
they ruined the draft pick all right, though.
Yeah, if they ruin this one though, like if they actually win too many games and like just get a hair out and miss on Connor Bedard, I feel like there might be some pretty upset people.
But it's a lottery anyway, right? Like even last year, even if you finish last, you have more chance of finishing third than you do first, right? Like it's just the way it works. Like I don't like, obviously if they finish like 2 points out of the playoffs and finish 15th in the lottery, that's bad. Yes. But if they finish like 6th instead of 5th, or even last year, if they get goaltending at any point last year, even when Dominic Ducharme was the coach, they don't finish last, right? Like as bad as last year was, it was everything going wrong for them, right?
Well, I think you would have put Brodeur and Roy in the same net last year. It wouldn't have made a difference. Like you see, the goaltending issue is kind of the reflection of the defense, and you're seeing it right now. Like Montembeault wasn't that sharp last year. Looked pretty sharp to me tonight.
Yeah, except
but
for
at the same
goal,
time,
yeah.
If at the same time, how many times were they 2-0 down 5 minutes into games last year?
Mm.
Like I feel like it happened a lot all the time, right? Like, I don't think that Montembeault was as bad as he was last year. I think the defense was really bad last year. Yes, absolutely. But over 82 games, the goaltending should have been a little bit better than it was overall, right? Like, and that's all I mean is like if they win 3 more games, they're ahead of Arizona. They might even be ahead of Seattle. Like it's just things like that where they were so bad and just barely finished last. Where this year they're going to be better, right? Like I think all expectations that over 83 games will be better this year. And I don't know if Arizona and Chicago will
I don't think they have a shot at finishing last, honestly,
No,
because they're going to be
just want to get in the lottery.
Yeah,
for sure.
They're going to be in like the 26 to like 32 range because like they're going to lose a lot of games, but a lot of the games are going to be tight and they're going to be a coin flip. So I don't know. It's going to be tough to predict.
Yeah, I mean, look at the preseason, right? How many 5-4 games do they lose in preseason? That's a perfect result. Lots of goals and they lose. So I mean, that's if that's how the season goes most of the time, that I think a lot of fans will be okay with that.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think the number one thing that fans should be clamoring for right now is to get Cole Caufield signed to an 8-year deal because that price is not going down. It's not going down from where it is right now. Like, I think right now, if they sign him to like an 8x8, they can probably get it done. But by the end of the season, when he's at 40-something goals, I don't think it's 8x8 anymore.
It's going to be really
interesting. Got it done yesterday, if you ask me.
I agree.
It's really interesting because this is going to be Kent Hughes' first real big negotiation as a GM. And he's sat on the other side of that table a lot with a lot of really good players. So it's going to be very interesting to see, and I don't think he's going to necessarily, try and shortchange Caufield. Like I don't think he's
not going to get
like
a discount either way. Like even if it's like this negotiator, this whiz of negotiation, it's not going to happen though. No. But yeah, I see where you're going.
But it'll be interesting because I think the same thing. I think Marc Bergevin, for all the negative he had in the last few months of his tenure, signing Suzuki when he did it. Saved him a lot of money. Right?
Some of the draft picks we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
They're from Bergevin's era of drafting.
It is ironic that Bergevin got fired at the end there, and that's probably when he made most of his best decisions.
Well, no. That offseason was really bad.
No. The offseason was terrible. But the last couple of drafts, that group did all right. Yeah. Grabbed Caufield, Caden Gooley, signing Suzuki. I thought it was a no-brainer, like most of us would, but he still got it done for probably below market value. Like if he was a UFA right now, he'd get a lot more than that. But they got to find a way to get Caufield signed. And it's one of those situations where the one problem with Bergevin negotiating, because most of his contracts that he did sign were pretty good value, especially for his top-end players. Yeah. But none of them ended up very peaceful. Like there was always hard feelings, right? So I feel like you don't want to get that with this new contract with Cole Caufield. I feel like we can trust that Ken Hughes and Jeff Gordon aren't going to be pissing off Cole Caufield's camp. I think the money truck's going to come backing up.
Yeah, and I think
I don't even know if Jordan Harris is playing for this team if Bergevin was still there.
Yeah,
so
that's a good point as well. Yeah, I mean, look, Marc Bergevin did a lot of this prospect pool that people are so excited about was because of Marc Bergevin and Trevor Timmins, right? There's no two ways about that. And it became clear near the end of his tenure that he wasn't going to see the fruits of his labor. The Stanley Cup run kind of put a little bit doubt on that, but prior to that, it was pretty clear that he wasn't going to stay for 15 years as GM of the Canadiens, one way or another. And I think that the last few months of Bergevin's tenure really, I think, paints a picture of a GM who kind of lost his way, but he did do a lot of good things leading up to that. And I mean, the Canadiens are where they are now because of it, right? Like Cole Caufield, Caden Gooley, Nick Suzuki, like there's a lot of good things there that he did near the end. I think that you can paint lines on clear times when Marc Bergevin changed course, and there were bad ones and good ones, and there was some good, and anyone who says he was always bad or always great is wrong.
No, it's
Because
more
it was
nuanced
really
than that. But it's always like that with Chief Scout. Like you're
Yeah.
never rewarded for like your last 3 or 4 drafts. You pay for the mistakes you've done like
Yeah.
5 years ago,
Yeah.
and 5 years later, like maybe they realize you're good. So it's that kind of business, and you have to live with it. Those are the terms.
Yeah.
No,
And I feel like
exactly.
this conversation about some of the fruits of Bergevin's last few drafts coming to this team, right? It kind of rolls into the next topic that we wanted to talk about, which is the defense. Because one thing that stood out to me in this game, specifically from Kovacevic, was him sticking to plays, where he would make a play where sometimes he would make a mistake, but he would stick to it so hard that he would recover the puck and make the right play after. And that comes with like extreme confidence, right? Not just in yourself, but in the fact that you're definitely not going to get benched for making a mistake. And that's something that was a huge issue for Bergevin's entire tenure. And we can talk about whether it's a coach's thing
Defenseman backing up all the time.
Yeah, always afraid of making a big play, right? Except for the one guy that they really didn't like and had to trade. But for the most part, guys weren't confident to do that. Now they are. I think that's a huge change in development for defensemen because, frankly, as much as Bergevin drafted Caden Gooley, and he drafted Jordan Harris too, but they weren't developed under his regime, really, right? And they didn't develop a single top 4 defenseman in 10 years.
Yeah, that's the issue. Is that look, there's drafting and then there's development. And I think Trevor Timmins gets lumped into both. For better, for worse. And I'm not here to rehash all that, but I think development is so key. And the way that you can figure out that the Canadiens are so far behind in development is just how refreshing how everyone is talking right now. Like I even down to Laval. Like I straight up asked Matthias Norlinder, what's the biggest difference between last year and this year? And himself. And he's like, I know where I'm going to be. Like just not knowing where you're going to be for a whole year, like that's management's job. Like, what are you doing, right? Like, what are you doing when you're not communicating to players? Like, like Jesperi Kotkaniemi kept on saying, nobody told me why I was benched. What are you doing? Like, it's and I think that development is what held this team back for so long. Whether it was Bergevin, whether it was Michel Therrien, it was probably a little bit of both, to be completely honest. I just think that it's so refreshing, and I think that that's part of the reason why Martin St. Louis is the perfect coach for right now. When this team is ready to contend, will he have the tactics down? Will he have the strategy down to run a bench and win games? We don't know, but he has 3 years to develop talent and then 3 years to develop that. Like, I don't, for right now, this is a development organization. So Martin St. Louis is the perfect coach for this right now. And I think that it just goes down, whether it's whoever you hear talk, whether it's Adam Nicholas or Jeff Gorton or Kent Hughes or Martin St. Louis or JF Houle or Marie-Philippe Poulin or Scott Pellerin or anybody, they're all talking the same language. And it's so refreshing because this team is going to ride or die based on their development. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. If you don't develop the talent, and I'm not talking about the Suzukis and the Caufields, even though that makes a huge difference. Just look at Cole Caufield last year. But if you can get those, right, if you get that like second tier of like Jordan Harris was always a solid prospect, but the way he's playing now is just completely different, right? If you can get the Jordan Harrises and a Jonathan Kovacevic is to kind of take a step up and be NHL defenseman, you're laughing because you still have Justin Barron in Laval. You have Matthias Norlinder in Laval. Like, it's just but like if you can get NHL players out of prospects that might make it, because that never happened under Marc Bergevin. Never. It was either you were a can't miss prospect or you failed.
And tell you what, like talking from people around the league, I could tell you that there was no plan for the development with the Montreal Canadiens. Like their basic approach to development was having Rob Ramage take the prospects for coffee or for dinner. that was their approach to development. That was it. Like there was no framework involved or whatever. There was no planning one step ahead. And obviously that's changed, and now there are resources, but there was really not much of an old school mentality there, because Bergevin kept saying, like, young players, they have to make decisions for us. But the way he was saying it is, we're not going to do anything for you. Like, you do everything, and we're going to take a decision based on that, but we're not going to, like, provide any resources to you for you to upgrade your game.
And you saw that, right? Look at Alex Galchenyuk, Jesperi Kotkaniemi. They both had real success in the NHL. Like, look, Kotkaniemi's first season was good, right?
Yeah,
he was
Galchenyuk's first season, like that 2013 season, he had the highest points per 60 of any teenager in the NHL since Sidney Crosby.
Yeah.
And like to not make bank on that because he's not good defensively, figure it out.
The issue is Marc Bergevin said two things, and Nick, you mentioned a couple of them. He also always said, we give every prospect the same tools, and the NHL is not a development league.
That's a problem, you know?
Right, exactly. Like you can tell that they thought the NHL wasn't a development league because Kotkaniemi and Galchenyuk got worse in the NHL, which doesn't happen with 18, 19-year-olds in the NHL. It just doesn't happen. And I think that's a complete change. Look, Cole Caufield last year is a perfect example of that. He had no there's things that you can do as a coach and an organization to give him confidence, and it's not just send him to Laval and hope he scores, right? Like, exactly. That's not the solution.
No, nope. And it is a coincidence, but it's also not a coincidence that he started scoring right after the coaching change. You know, like it happening right then is too funny, but.
I think Cole Caufield's last game under Ducharme, before Ducharme got fired, was his best game of the season to that point as well.
It was.
Like, I know that the narrative is that Ducharme got fired, but that first game he didn't score in that game, but that was his best game in a long time. And he went back to Wisconsin. He had some time to kind of reset, and I think that played a part in it as well. But I think having the freedom that he ended up getting under St. Louis.
And you know what? Well. That was not entirely on Ducharme either. It was like the whole philosophy from the top. Like, you had to burn it all down.
Yeah. Yep, 100%. And that old school philosophy of like they have to fight their way to the top. There are a lot of people around the NHL who
figure it out,
who think that way, right? But when you're an organization like the Montreal Canadiens, who has, like, at least from what they say, historically trouble attracting unrestricted free agents, has to pay more for some guys because there's higher taxes in Quebec, which frankly is not actually true if you have a good accountant. But anyway, if you have those restrictions on you already, or like some players don't want to play here because they don't want to speak French, which is crazy because it's Montreal. You don't even have to speak French. It's so easy to live here. It's a great city. But if you have those restrictions in your mind, then you have to make bank on every possible prospect that you bring into the organization. You have to give them every possible resource to squeeze blood from a stone. And refusing to do that and invest in that is crazy.
Yeah. Like, there's no salary cap on those resources you provide. Like, you're not limited.
Bingo.
And the Montreal Canadiens are supposed to be the Yankees of the NHL. So they have to throw money, like whatever money you have in bank, you throw it in the development in all facets of the game. You have to be ahead of the curve everywhere compared to every other NHL team. That is the standard that is set in Montreal.
Yeah, and look, like you can look at even their drafting because it plays hand in hand. Like, they did take some home run swings, right? Like Michael McCarron was, like, he wasn't. Everyone's like, oh, he's big, so it's a safe pick. No, but
it wasn't a pretty off the board pick.
It was off the board, but it wasn't safe. Is what I'm saying.
But it was the wrong kind of home run swing, though.
Well,
they were just trying to go for the wrong kind.
What happened behind the scenes, though, is Bergevin literally went up to Timmins and he was like, "Yeah, just draft me the biggest center." Yeah. And Timmins was like, but also, like, there are some pretty good players available on the board, Mark. I don't know if you want to do that. It was like, no, yeah, fuck off. Like, just draft the biggest center.
Yeah, but I mean, like, even doing that, like,
because the Sanders were like
get away with
involved physically against the Avs during that series, and like they reacted to that pretty much.
And you can also get away with that if you have a plan in place. Like the Canadiens took Juraj Slafkovsky with a plan in place. Like they didn't just take him because they thought he was the best player, right? They took him because they're like, we can make this guy better going forward, and he had a plan for it. Like if you try and hit home runs in the draft, and you use the development system the Canadiens have, it's like going up to bat against Randy Johnson with a pencil as your bat. Like it's you're not going to get anything away from it.
Well, and if you want to see a success story of like development, look at Soderblom in Detroit, right? Like when we had Hadi Kalakesh on a couple games ago, like he was talking about how like a couple years ago, he was like, there was no player there. There was like around the edges, you could see something, but Detroit just focused in on him. And now he's like a cheat code. I don't know how good he's going to be, but he looks like he has the potential to like break the league.
And you know what? McCarron actually showed promise during his first season in the American Hockey League. I thought he had some skill for a big guy, and I actually like saw some potential as an eventual fourth line or third liner, like not a top six guy, but I saw something, and I can tell you what, like I didn't see anything like the following years.
Ryan Poehling on the other side tonight is another example of that, right? Like he had flashes. Right, he had flashes of being a solid, maybe even a middle six NHL player, like at times, but you could just tell that nobody helped them to get better. Like it just was not look, you don't become the MVP at the World Juniors and then lose all your skill. It just doesn't happen. Like, and it wasn't like he wasn't translating. It wasn't like it was like it didn't work out. He just went from that to zero, right? And it took him like 2-3 years in Laval to even start scoring again. Like it was just such a weird development path. And I think that, everything you can point to in terms of why the Canadiens are where they are, it's because they just couldn't develop anybody other than can't miss prospects.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing things there start to change already, which is crazy. Part of that is luck, like having a guy like Caden Gooley who slots in 4 games into his NHL career, plays almost 25 minutes hard matched against Sidney Crosby and Evgeni Malkin.
Insane.
And he was incredible.
He's carrying
tonight.
David Savard. David Savard.
He was phenomenal tonight.
Like, I'm actually wondering, like, when Madison comes back, does he still slot in as the number 1 defenseman on this blue line?
He might.
He might.
Not every night.
He's a horse on the ice.
Gooley's going to be number 1. Look, I said it on Twitter, and everything I've seen from Caden Gooley in the last 6 months has convinced me that he literally is going to be a star in this league. And I'm not saying star as in Cale Makar or things like that, but he's going to be that defenseman that you can pencil in for 25 minutes in your lineup for 15 years.
Yep.
Like you don't have to worry about him. He's kind of like, I don't want to say he's Shea Weber, but like Shea Weber, you can put in the lineup for 25 minutes a night and not worry about him. That's how you feel about Caden Gooley. Like he's going to be such a good defenseman. He can skate too. Like I think there's untapped offensive potential in Gooley as well. Like there's so much to be said about his defense, but I think his skating for his size is unbelievable. Like not for his size, his skating is great. And the fact that he combines that with great size is you mentioned Soderblom as a cheat code. It's a cheat code for Gooley too, right? Like guys that big shouldn't skate like that.
I follow the prospects a lot for TVA Sports, and one thing that was said about Gooley in his draft year is how strong he was defensively, but maybe there was some limitation to his offensive game. And you know what? Like from his draft year, I never doubted his offensive skills because the tools were there. He was so athletic as a D-man. He had a good skating stride. He had a good shot. And tonight we saw him involved in offensively. He took 7 shots on net.
It's crazy. There was actually a comment here in the stream chat from Jeffrey B. He says he can be our Jacob Slavin, and I think that's a fantastic comparable.
Yeah, that's
true. An excellent shutdown defenseman who's mostly a defensive defenseman, but also has surprisingly good offensive numbers. I think that's actually a fantastic comparable.
And not on the power play, yeah.
Well, even the power play got better when he was out there.
Yeah, it's true. Poor Chris Weidman. The one thing he's brought in.
Worse. It can't get worse than it was, but still, it got better with
His power play would be quarterbacked by Lane Hodson anyway, so it's a moot point.
If all goes well.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, there's so much to look forward to with this prospect group, and frankly, we're going to see it this season just on the defense. even when Slafkovsky is, I would say, inevitably sent down. There's so many young players. Yeah. They're going to be exciting. I think at some point we're probably going to see Jesse Ylonen make the NHL permanently this year. I think you look at his underlying numbers, both in Laval and with the Canadiens, I think he's going to get there. He might already be here if they didn't have so many contracts that they can't move.
That's true.
He's what everyone wants Mike Hoffman to be, right? Yeah. Like Mike Hoffman is like that guy who can shoot and be involved in the play. Jesse Ylonen is that guy, right? Like he's a good Mike Hoffman. Not like, I don't want to rag on Mike Hoffman too much, but like what his strengths are is exactly what Jesse Ylonen could bring to a team too, right? Like,
but you know what? I didn't mind Mike Hoffman with the Senators. I didn't mind Mike Hoffman with the Panthers, but the guy aged like milk.
Yeah, that skill set doesn't age. I don't think. I think that's a major.
That's true.
I mean, that's the thing. When your primary skill is like scoring from a distance, right? Like eventually teams can pretty easily adjust to that, and you don't get into the slot. You're not a good passer because he's a terrible passer. Doesn't bring much defensively. I will say in the neutral zone, he's pretty good at takeaways. Like when he's on his game, he can force some takeaways. But yeah,
he's like that baseball pitcher who like threw like 98 for years, and now he's down to like 92, and his fastball is just straight, and it's very hittable.
Yeah, it's like just that little change is actually too much. To survive, right? Like
it's like when you see guys who are really good in the AHL, and then that speed difference in the NHL just completely zaps their opportunity. Like Charles Hudon is a good example of that, right? Like in the AHL, he was Charles Hudon, like in the AHL, was a legitimate star in the AHL, and as soon as he gets to the AHL, like that split second of difference just makes it's so weird because you don't notice the speed difference when you're watching games side by side, but like you just don't have that time that you would have normally, and I think it just makes a difference when players age as well. It's just,
who was that guy in Detroit, like kind of random, but Timo Pulkkinen, like
he was like a scoring phenom.
Like he tore the AHL, but whenever he would get called up in the NHL, he couldn't do it.
Chris Terry is another example of that.
Like, lots of guys like that. Tons of guys like that. All right, guys, I want to thank everybody for joining us here today. Thank you to Nicolas and Jared, because it's always so much fun talking to you guys. Before we close it out, do you guys have anything coming up that you want to promote or anything specifically you want to talk about? We'll start with Nicolas.
Yeah, sure. Well, we're going to be doing a lot of prospect profiles ahead of the draft. So I'll be writing about Gabriel Perreault, who is the youngest of the Perreault right now. You know, his brother Jacob got drafted by the Ducks. But Gabriel is playing for the U.S. in TDP right now. He's a really exciting prospect, and he might get drafted in the first round too.
Fantastic. Jared?
Thank you for not mentioning who his dad is, please, Nick, to make us feel old. Who's his
dad? Who's his dad? Make us feel old, Jared.
I'll make you feel older. Gabe Perreault was born during the lockout of 2004-2005.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel old when I see kids play in the World Juniors that are like born after 9/11.
Oh man. I mean, for me, HavesEyesOnThePrize.com, the coverage doesn't stop with games. We'll be all over prospects, Laval, the Canadiens, lots of fun stuff coming up, and it's always a good time.
All right, we'll catch you everybody on Thursday as the Canadiens welcome the Arizona Coyotes on their Eastern Canada swing in the first edition this season of the greatest tank battles of 2022-2023. We'll see who comes out on top, and by on top I mean who loses and gives the other team 2 points in the Connor Bedard sweepstakes. All right, everybody, thanks